At the height of his power, this man was estimated to have made around $25 billion smuggling cocaine into the United States, using a private fleet of jumbo jets. And then, in the summer of 1997, he tried to disappear completely. Not by fleeing the country, not by hiding in a jungle compound. He tried to erase his own face. What happened in that operating room in Mexico City would end his life and trigger a trail of revenge killings that shocked even seasoned investigators. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how it happened. This is one of the strangest endings in the history of organized crime, and most people have never heard the full story. Amado Carrillo Fuentes ran the Juárez cartel through much of the 1980s and 1990s, and at his peak, he controlled one of the largest single conduits of cocaine into the United States that has ever existed. Estimates from the DEA placed his personal fortune at roughly $25 billion.
He is credited, or blamed, depending on your view, with pioneering the use of large aircraft to move multi-ton cocaine shipments directly from Colombia into Mexico, a method that reshaped how trafficking organizations operated for decades afterward. Most people only know him, if at all, through fictionalized television dramas loosely based on his life. The real story is stranger and darker than the fiction. Carrillo Fuentes was born in December 1954 in Guamuchilito, a small community in the state of Sinaloa, Mexico, a region that would go on to produce several of the most infamous names in drug trafficking history. He was the nephew of one of the founders of what would become the Guadalajara Cartel, one of Mexico's first major trafficking organizations, and he entered that world early. In the 1980s, Sinaloa's rural economy offered few paths to wealth, and the emerging drug trade offered an obvious, if dangerous one. Carrillo Fuentes started, according to journalistic accounts, by moving marijuana. But he had one skill that would define his entire career. He learned to fly. That skill became the foundation of an empire.
As Colombian cocaine cartels searched for more efficient ways to move product north, Carrillo Fuentes offered something few others could, a working knowledge of aircraft and flight routes. But this is where things get interesting. Rather than staying a pilot or a mid-level operator, he began negotiating directly with Colombian suppliers, positioning himself as a logistics specialist who could guarantee delivery in bulk, by air, straight to the US border. It was a radically different model from the smaller overland and boat shipments most organizations relied on at the time. His rise inside the Juárez cartel itself came through violence. According to journalistic and law enforcement accounts, Carrillo Fuentes seized control of the organization after the killing of its previous leader, Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, in the early 1990s. From that point forward, he consolidated power over what would become one of the most dominant trafficking corridors on the continent, the stretch of border between Ciudad Juárez and El Paso, Texas. What followed earned him his famous nickname, El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies.
Carrillo Fuentes assembled a private fleet of aircraft, reportedly including retired commercial jets, to move multi-ton shipments of cocaine from South America into Mexico in a single flight, quantities that would have taken dozens of smaller trips using older smuggling methods. He financed and expanded this fleet partly by laundering money through networks connected to Colombia. By the mid-1990s, US officials described the Juárez cartel as the single most powerful trafficking organization operating along the entire Mexican border, surpassing rival organizations that had dominated the trade for years. Here's what made his operation especially hard to stop. Carrillo Fuentes was notoriously private. Unlike some traffickers who courted public attention, he was rarely photographed and avoided the kind of visibility that made other cartel leaders easier to track. He also invested heavily in corrupting officials. In one case that drew international headlines, Mexico's top anti-drug official at the time was jailed after allegations surfaced that he had been receiving payments connected to Carrillo Fuentes' organization, a scandal that badly damaged confidence in Mexico's anti-narcotics efforts and strained cooperation with US agencies. But by 1997, The walls were closing in. A senior U.S. drug official at the time described Carrillo Fuentes as having become, in his own words, too big and too notorious to keep operating unnoticed. Mexican forces nearly captured him that year during a raid connected to his sister's wedding. U.S. intelligence sources later indicated that in his final months, Carrillo Fuentes was living as a fugitive, reportedly flying between countries, including Russia and Cuba, searching for a safe haven that never fully materialized. And this is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. Rather than fleeing permanently, Carrillo Fuentes decided on a different kind of disappearance. In July 1997, he checked into a private clinic in Mexico City, the Santa Monica Hospital in the Polanco district, under a false identity. Over the course of about 8 hours, surgeons performed extensive plastic surgery to alter his facial features, along with liposuction that removed a significant amount of body fat, all intended to make him unrecognizable to the authorities hunting him. At first, it appeared to go smoothly. He was moved to a recovery room that evening.
But sometime before dawn, a doctor making rounds found him dead in his bed. According to the account that later emerged from Mexican authorities, Carrillo Fuentes suffered a fatal reaction, reportedly linked to a combination of sedatives and anesthesia, which triggered respiratory failure, followed by cardiac arrest. The most powerful drug trafficker in Mexico had died not in a gunfight, not in a police raid, but on an operating table, trying to vanish into a new face. The DEA was invited to view the body and photograph it before the funeral, and officials publicly confirmed his death within days.
But the strangeness didn't end there. Because his appearance had just been surgically altered, rumors immediately spread that the body wasn't actually his, that Carrillo Fuentes had faked his own death using a substitute patient. A local barber who examined a published photo of the corpse's hands told a reporter they didn't match the drug lord's, famously describing them as looking more like a pianist's hands than a trafficker's. Even a relative of Carrillo Fuentes publicly insisted, after the funeral, that he was still alive. American investigators firmly rejected the idea that he had slipped away.
What followed the death was brutal, and it revealed just how far his organization's reach extended. Months later, in November 1997, authorities discovered 3 sealed drums along a highway between Mexico City and Acapulco. Inside were the decomposing remains of men who had been part of the surgical team involved in Carrillo Fuentes' final operation. Investigators concluded they had been killed in apparent retaliation for his death, a chilling illustration of how even a cartel leader's demise could trigger a violence far removed from any battlefield. Here are a few facts about this case that tend to surprise people. Carrillo Fuentes was assessed by the DEA to have accumulated roughly $25 billion over the course of his criminal career. He died at around 40 to 42 years old, depending on the source, with conflicting birth records. At least 3 doctors connected to his final surgery are believed to have been killed afterward. He had 11 siblings, and one of them, his brother Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, took over leadership of the Juárez cartel immediately after his death.
Decades later, in 2020, Carrillo Fuentes' Mexico City villa was auctioned off by the Mexican government for more than $2 million, with proceeds directed toward public health services. And his own son, Vicente Carrillo Leyva, was later arrested as an alleged senior cartel figure in his own right. The Juárez cartel didn't die with Amado Carrillo Fuentes.
Under his brother's leadership, it remained one of Mexico's dominant trafficking organizations for years, fueling a brutal turf war with rival cartels that contributed to the deaths of thousands of people, particularly in Ciudad Juárez, which became one of the most violent cities in the world during that period. Vicente Carrillo Fuentes himself evaded capture for nearly 2 decades before Mexican authorities finally arrested him in 2014. He was later convicted and sentenced to 28 years in prison.
The organization's power has significantly diminished since then, But the pattern Amado Carrillo Fuentes established, using aircraft, corruption, and secrecy to move cocaine at an industrial scale, influenced how trafficking networks across the region operated for years afterward. In the end, the man who built one of the most sophisticated smuggling operations in modern history wasn't taken down by a raid, a betrayal from within, or a courtroom conviction. He was undone trying to erase the one thing that made him identifiable in the first place: his own face.
It's a strange, almost mythic ending for a man who spent his career avoiding cameras and courtrooms alike. And it's part of why his story still generates fascination and conspiracy nearly 3 decades later.
Do you think Amado Carrillo Fuentes could have avoided this fate? Or was his downfall inevitable the moment his organization grew too large to stay hidden? Let us know what part of this story surprised you the most in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime documentaries breaking down the rise and fall of history's most notorious criminal figures.